welcome back to Sam Meads Reads. I'm Sam. Thanks for joining me today. Big news this week is I finally did it. I finished the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, and I think I'm going to get into some kind of spoilery kind of reviews of it. Bit of talk about the book, what I thought about it. But there was more news. I actually finished technically 2 books, and I want to talk about this a little bit as well, because when I picked up this one, I realised it was going to take me a while, and so what I decided to do was also listen to an audiobook whilst I was reading this one, so that I was consuming kind of 2 books at the same time, but could generally listen to the audiobook when I was in the car, when I was driving around. I do a lot of driving for my job, so it was a great way to get some more kind of content in me whilst also reading probably the biggest book I've ever read. But first of all, I want to talk about audiobooks a bit, because I do listen to audiobooks. I generally don't listen to too much fiction audiobooks. I generally listen to a lot of non-fiction, autobiographies, and anything that, especially if the author as well is reading it himself. That's fantastic, because you kind of you're getting the story told, especially an autobiography, by the actual person. So that's kind of where I am with audiobooks. I know there's a lot of snobbery around audiobooks. Some people, don't count them. Some people some people do. My personal thing is I don't actually add good onto my Goodreads kind of. If I aim to read 40 books in a year or 50 books in a year, any audiobooks wouldn't get added to that. There's not much snobbery in there. It's more, for me, I think if you're listening or you're reading, you are consuming the same content. You're consuming, the same ideas, the same things that are going to start getting you thinking. You're getting all of it. It's not like you're going to go, I got more out of this book because I read it, as opposed to I got more out of it or less out of it because I listened. I don't think that actually happens. But I think we all know, I remember in school we have these different ways of learning. Some people are better at, taking things in when they're reading. Some people are better at listening. And I think different ways of learning and different ways of consuming things, you are better at some than others. What I do believe is that reading is a skill. It's something that the more you do, the better you are at it. And I know that if you are say dyslexic or you have trouble reading, absolutely there's mitigating circumstances, but I would still probably argue that even if you have those circumstances, the more you do read, the better you become at it. So if I'm reading a big book or I'm reading lots of books, I'm getting better at reading as I go along. I'm always getting better because I'm practicing that skill. Whereas if I listen to an audiobook, I'm not practicing that skill. I'm not reading, which is a skill. So that's where I do kind of draw the distinction. I also think, if you're listening to something, say like poetry or like Shakespeare, which is very much done in a very specific meter, then again it's that skill of reading that you what do? You interpret that meter yourself as you're reading. You do it in your own voice. You do it in your own patter, basically. Whereas if you are listening, obviously you're getting that from someone else. You're taking someone else's interpretation of that, of the meter or of the patterns of speech from that person who's reading it. One thing I would say though is that, and I'm sure I'm going to find it with the Count of Monte Cristo, is that if I had listened to an audiobook, I would have been able to pronounce a lot of the names a lot better. So there is that kind of trade-off. But that's it. I still think anyone who's read the book versus listening to the book or any book, they've still read the same thing. They've still consumed exactly the same content. It's just there's 2 different skills kind of being involved there. And personally for me, I find that when I'm reading, I concentrate more. I don't have my attention taken away by anything else. I don't get distracted. I do find when I'm listening to an audiobook, there's lots of times where I'm like, oh, what? I've kind of zoned out for 5 minutes. I need to go back. And so there is that as well. I think for me personally, I don't pay as much attention when listening. So reading kind of tops it, especially for fiction, because I want to invent the world in my head. I enjoy doing that, and yeah, say with non-fiction I find it a little bit easier to listen to. And so for the audiobook I listened to, I was actually it was Mythos by Stephen Fry, was the audiobook I decided to listen to. And it's very odd. The reason I decided to listen to that book, and that was the one I chose to, was I wanted something that was quite different from the Count of Monte Cristo. I thought, I'm reading this classic, and it's odd, yeah, it's like I was reading a classic and then I was listening about the classics. And actually, weirdly enough, and I'm sure if you've read the Count of Monte Cristo, you know anything about Greek mythology, which is what Mythos is about. There's some very, like, it really prepared me actually listening to the book of Mythos and then reading the Count of Monte Cristo. There was so many connections between them that I actually ended up getting a lot more out of the Count of Monte Cristo thanks to kind of this serendipitous choice of book. So yeah, I'll just talk about Mythos for a quick second and just say it's really enjoyable listen or read. Stephen Fry, obviously fantastic author, and having him read his own book, he's a world-class narrator as well. So getting him to read his own words, it works so well, and he puts so much life into those stories, which really didn't make any of it boring at all. It was always really interesting. So yeah, I definitely recommend going out and either reading or listening to Mythos. I think they've just brought out an illustrated edition as well, which looks lovely. So yeah, if you do, check that one out as well, because I'm sure that's a gorgeous book. And yeah, so went from that to reading the Count of Monte Cristo. So I will say now, there will be some spoilers at this point. I think what I'll do is I'll just give you a bit of my kind of initial thoughts, reaction, what I actually thought of the book in terms of like, was it good, was it bad, and I'll talk a bit more deeply about it. But I loved it. So it's fantastic. It's a big book. It's probably the longest book I've ever read. My copy is 1,462 pages long. So yeah, easily the biggest book I've ever read. But it flew by, There are sections where it goes a bit slower, but they're so worth it, because you get to live these lives, you get to really invest in these different characters, and yeah, it is an epic, I want to say odyssey. It's an epic odyssey, it's an epic journey, and kind of I loved every part of it. I think there can be complaints that in the middle there's definitely, I think, what I would say, there's definitely 3 sections to this book. There's the initial kind of capture and imprisonment of Edmond Dante, our protagonist in the book. There's the section where he's then he goes into prison. There's the section where he comes out of prison, and then there's the revenge section. But they're kind of in between him getting his way out of prison and the revenge, which is where probably the meat of the story is. I can understand why people would say that's a bit slow. It's a bit more ponderous, but it all kind of, maybe if the end wasn't as good, if the kind of revenge section of, well, I'd say the final kind of third of the book wasn't as good, then maybe you'd say it was a bit boring. But it is so worth it. It becomes, the world is so expertly realised, and everything Dumas is trying to do in here works, I think. And especially if you've, say, I'm going to bring some of the Greek mythology in a second, and I think now it's going to be a bit more spoilery. I definitely think there's so much here, and so much that he's doing with this story. And I obviously, what I will do as well is I'll say the reason I decided to start reading it now was because of Emmy, the other booktuber, doing Game of Tomes of Caroline, and I've just watched their video as well, their wrap up, and obviously I don't really want to repeat anything they said, but I think they delve more into the different characters, and I don't think I'm going to do that as much. I do know that they said that they weren't as happy with the kind of happy ending, but actually I think it really works, the kind of happy ending as well in this book, that I do think it was planned. I think there's some great subversions, and again, I think I mentioned when I first started talking about the book that there was definitely, for me, I was like, oh, his name's Dante, he's gone to prison. Is this hell? He's gone to, like, is this the Divine Comedy being retold in a different way? And the Divine Comedy actually is name checked in the book a couple of times as well, along with a lot of other classics. Yeah, and I still believe that's part of it. I think that's definitely part of it. There's definitely, to me, for the Count, this is a story of him, dying, being reborn, and then he's being reborn, but his heart's not beating. I think that, I said in a bit in Rome where there was this whole section where people were talking about him being a vampire, about him being undead, and that's where I was like, oh, this is him. But, he's come back to life, he's gone through hell. But I always remember that Dante's, Divine Comedy, I've not read it, but I've read so many summaries of it, and I'm very interested in reading it at some point. But there's definitely things I've read about it saying about how he, in the Divine Comedy, it's about descent into hell, but then coming back out and going towards heaven. And I think that's what it kind of, for me, is what the Count's doing. He's come out of hell, he's now punishing the sinners, but slowly, as you get towards the end of the book, he's, going towards some kind of peace, some kind of heaven. He's not out of it just by escaping the prison. He is not out of his own hell yet. He's still kind of ascending. And so that, to me, is, there's so much of this which is his heart kind of being, life being pumped back into it. And as he's going on his revenge plot, especially with Mercedes, and how she, kind of stops his plans, but actually, in a way, reignites his love. And then, with Haidee and Morel as well, those kind of three people who kind of, they're almost the people who you don't they aren't really part of his plans, in terms of he isn't seeking revenge against them, but they are people who are definitely like the innocents caught in the kind of the crosshairs, but they are the people who make him question himself, and I'd say bring him back, bring him back to life fully. With that as well, I'd also say this is where I think there's a lot of Greek mythology in here as well. So Dante, Edmond Dante, and the Count of Monte Cristo, he talks so much about, being this divine angel of revenge, doing God's work, and there's so much of, like, say, Christian faith in that, but also within it you've got like kind of Roman religion and, say, Greek, because obviously a lot of this Roman religion stuff borrowed and from the Greek mythologies. So I just started noticing these little kind of, just say, odd little sections or references. So the first one was Eugenie. She was called the Chaste Diana, and then at that time I'd just been listening about Artemis, who is Diana so Artemis in Greek mythology is Diana in Roman mythology. And so I was like, oh, like, I knew who that was, I knew who they were referencing, but then it didn't stop there. And I feel those kind of references really helped, and there was so much talk about characters. And one of the big references I started noticing as it got through was like, had a lightning bolt landed by their feet, they haven't been more shocked. And at one point it's like, eyed him like a father who has just set aside his lightning bolt. And so this is all kind of, to me, allusions to Zeus and his acts of, obviously when he defeated the Titans, and being able to, when he was unhappy or wanted to smite someone, he would throw lightning bolts. So I started picking up on those references. There was Morel when he's leaving the Count, to go to from Marseille to Monte Cristo. The boat is called Eros, which is the god of the eastern wind, I believe, in Greek mythology. So, again, so all these things I was listening to started paying dividends when I was reading the book. And one really interesting point was when, and I've noticed there's a lot of questions about it online, which were, why did the Count not eat when he was at the party of say, Mercedes and Albert? And there's a lot of people saying it's something to do with kind of more Eastern kind of superstitions, that if you are, an enemy of someone, you don't eat in their house, but actually there's a really interesting line where Mercedes says to Albert, I wish he would have partaken even a morsel of pomegranate. And I'd just been listening to the story of Persephone, who was tricked by Hades into eating one pomegranate seed, and that meant that she was forever kind of tied to Hades and trapped for 6 months of the year in the underworld. And I do think, I was like, oh, so it's like Mercedes she's trying to bring the Count back into their lives, into the lives of, say, mortal beings, and the Count is this kind of elusive, immortal figure who's as powerful as a god. And yes, just the use of like the word pomegranate, and I thought that was really interesting. And then the biggest one, obviously, there's a whole chapter. Let me just quickly find it. Chapter 52, Pyramus and Thisbe. And obviously, I know when Emmy and Caroline were talking about it, they were talking about how Morel and Valentine were the kind of Romeo and Juliet characters. But I say, Dumas has done, he does the work for us. He calls that chapter Pyramus and Thisbe, who are, who many people believe are the inspirations for Romeo and Juliet, and obviously are in Midnight Summer's Dream. And it's very interesting that, that their story is, I say, again, listen to it in Mythos, which is about the couple who, think one's dead, so kill themselves. And it's very interesting that Dumas kind of subverts that in the end and turns that into a happy ending, even though he kind of has geared up our expectations with the chapter title of being like, Morel and Valentine are these doomed lovers, but they're not. And I thought that was really interesting. And the other interesting thing, again, just last thing on kind of Greek mythology with it, was knowing that obviously Elysium is the kind of the land of the best part of the afterlife, and the Count sets up kind of his home on the Champs-Élysées, which is Elysium Fields. Like that's what it's named after. So it's odd that the Count has gone to Elysium, but there's also let's talk about how if you go to Elysium 3 times, and like you'll be granted into the Isle of the Blessed as well, which is if you die basically 3 times and reach Elysium. And yeah, it's interesting that Morel is one of those people who and Hades, who have, I'd say, the happy endings. They are the people who have resided in his house in Elysium or the Champs-Élysées. So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. So definitely there's so many different references. You could go from like Madame de Villefort and her son Edward, the carriage that's kind of got loose, and that could be the tale of Apollo's son flying the carriage and it crashing. Like there's so many different versions of the classics in here as well. I do think that kind of adds to the import of the book, of the kind of, it feels epic because of all these kind of references. It feels larger than life because of that, and I love that part of it. I love the fact that the Count felt larger than life. This story of him kind of being reborn, of him getting his revenge, it feels bigger than just one man, getting his revenge. And the way he gets his revenge is spectacular as well. There's I'd obviously seen the film, and obviously I can't remember the film too well, but I believe it ends in a duel. And the fact that there's not actually a duel in the book, and he does it in such more subtle, in such more clever and personal ways of kind of getting his revenge against the kind of 4 men who have wronged him. I also keep seeing it in the book, or sorry, online, where I've just had a little bit of research afterwards about how a lot of people see Fernand as kind of main villain, and it just seems to me like, I feel like how everyone in the story, that he's probably the one villain, what I would say, he's the villain that I don't know if he is the main villain. I just think it's because he's with Mercedes, and I think expectation is that, oh, he loved Mercedes, he's going to get his love back, and it's not really about that. I say it's there is a hope there, and she definitely is part of bringing him back to life, but that the story's not really about him winning his love back. So I don't really see, Fernando obviously is a villain. He was the one who, he was the one who acted, and who did the act which got Dante arrested. But obviously you've got Dangler, who I think is, you know, because he's a jealousy comes more from an active position of, I'm jealous of you because, you know, you're liked and you're going to get that position, ahead of like a romantic jealousy. I think that seems a bit more crass. Like, I think anyone can understand, oh, he loved the woman I love, I can understand that, as opposed to, oh, he wanted my job. That seems like a bit petty. And then obviously with Villefort, like, I think if he had done what he did to Dante to protect his father, I think again Dante would have understood that more, because he's, you know, in that position to, you know, he loves his father. But because it was all about his own position as well, I think Villefort kind of become to me, was the worst villain. The way that they all, you know, I think that's the other thing with Fernand, is that obviously he's proud of his son and he obviously loves his wife. Like, that's, you know, he's done this horrible thing, but he's very much committed to the people, you know, his family. So whereas obviously Dangler seems more of a villain to me, because he doesn't seem to care about anything but money. And the same with Villefort, because he just seems to be caring about his position. He doesn't really care about his dad. Everyone in his household is dying, and he's, you know, it's more about how it makes him look as a person, his position in society. So I'd say those two to me were the bigger villains. And then you've got Calarose, who was more of yeah, you know, he let these things happen, and he's a bit of a coward, and that was his real crime. So yeah, we talk about these kind of four main villains. That's kind of how I'd rate them. But I'm going to finish off this kind of review. I've probably waffled on too much about Greek mythology and the things I was getting out of this book, but I seriously, like, you know, kind of implore anyone who hasn't read it to give it a go. Yes, it's daunting. Yes, it's big. It took me much longer than I expected, but I still enjoyed every second of it. So now it's the Count of Monte Cristo. It's definitely a 5-star read for me. So go give that a go. And so moving on from the Count of Monte Cristo, I've got I've got so many books to read. I really want to read, but I didn't really want to delve into something really big again, that epic. I wanted to do something a little bit kind of smaller. So I picked up the Kamakura Food Detectives. I really love these Japanese kind of books. Anything you always see these on Waterstones, and that's why I first picked them up. I was like these like small hardbacks, Japanese books with a cat on the front, and I've enjoyed so many of them. So this is just a new one I picked up, which is about a father and daughter who they're food detectives. So someone comes to them with a, you know, I want to taste this meal again because it brings back these memories, and they then set about kind of recreating that meal and trying to find a perfect recipe to recreate those meals that those people had. So I'm really looking forward to reading this. I've read the first chapter already, really enjoying it. I'm actually going to do a bit of a roundup soon of what I call cozy books. I'll do my kind of top 5 cozy books, and maybe this one will make the list. But yeah, I'm reading that at the moment, and that'll be my next review, hopefully. And yeah, so I know I usually do like a record, but last week I did a record and a game. I want to stick with games, and I want to stick with walking for my last kind of little bit of a roundup. The other thing we've been playing at home a lot recently is Parks by Keymaster Games. Fantastic book where fantastic game where you're a hiker, trying to have the best experience on a hike. It's all about resource management and buying different things. I won't go too much into it just in case you're not gamers, won't know the terminology. I hardly know half the terminology, but it's such a lovely game to play and a lovely game to actually look at as well. There's a thing called the 59 Parks Initiative where they've done some artwork for every single national park in America, and so the artwork on the game, on the cards, is lovely as well. I also really like the fact that this has a 1-player mode as well, which I've played myself recently, and it's really good as a 1-player game as well, so I highly recommend Parks as well. So yeah, that's going to be the wrap up for this week. So finally finished Count of Monte Cristo, and so really enjoyed it. So yeah, if you've got it on your TBR list, definitely give it a read. I think I'm going to watch the movie again, just because I liked the movie when I watched it, but I kind of feel like it's a different story. So I'm going to go rewatch it and see what I think. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and hope you have a great week. Thanks a lot. Bye.